Alright everyone, it's time for another occult literature video. 320 pages of folk medicine. Link in the description of my edition of this work on Amazon. Second and third links are to my books blogs. I do have other herbal works available on those blogs. This is a compilation, however, and of course, as I said, full length, 320 pages. It contains multiple sections, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to put something together that was more organized, because a lot of times if you look especially at the 19th century sort of home remedy manuscripts, if you look at some of those works, there's really no order to them. So I created, for instance, an herbal section, and it's alphabetized, and it comes from half a dozen other works. And I just used abbreviations, so you'll be able to quickly see which work it came from. I didn't even use all of the herbal entries in those particular works, and I actually had several other works I didn't consult simply because of length. There's also a section that contains herbal receipts or recipes. By the way, the term recipe means something differently now than it did 100 years ago. The sort of home remedy guides, brief literary history on this sort of tradition. First you have grimoires, and you end up in the 1700s especially, and in France and some of these places, you get bric-a-brac works like a Petit Albert, where you've got spells and talismans alongside herbal medicine, and domestic cookery tips, how to make dye, how to cook bread, how to take care of pigeons in some cases, how to fatten your cattle. It's a bric-a-brac, it's a compilation of sort of how-to material, some of which is more superstitious, some of which is very much physical, very much mundane, actually. In the 19th century, in the 1800s, you get a move away from this, and the two kinds of work begin to split apart. One we now know is like cookbooks, simple tips and tricks and stuff, and the other side is more like folk material. Folk medicine, homeopathy comes in, that's sort of a pseudo-scientific field. And then you get other materials that are quackery, you would say. In these particular works, I have not attempted to differentiate, and I've simply looked at the kind of material. So there are inclusions from the Petit Albert, and from Homan's Powwows, and from Albertus Magnus' Egyptian Secrets. Those are the older bric-a-brac style works. We're talking, a century earlier than some of the others that I consulted. And then you've got some of the domestic works that are later, and they're more standardized. They're more rational, if you believe it. And a lot of them are taken from what's called the botanic method, the Thomsonian method. And so you get sort of a semi-standardization, sort of more of the era of the apothecary as opposed to the era of the witch or something that you went and got an herbal tea from. I find this to be fascinating. You could literally write a full-length work just on the evolution of this kind of literature. You could do another one for divination works, for the fortune-telling tradition. This is the other one that I've studied the most. And this is definitely my area of greatest interest, is in folklore, folk medicine, herbalism. This is my forte within the occult, and it is very much occult, just so you know. These medical recipes in here technically could be consulted even today. I also included a little bit of alchemical lore related to healing, specifically Hollandus' work on lead, which I do not recommend, by the way, attempting to turn lead into medicine. It may cause you to sweat, it may be a rubefacient, so to speak, but it's probably not curing any disease. And another one on the oil of antimony. Those are medicinal. I included a short work on medicinal astrology as well, which does have some mineral and herbal content towards the end. It has a few recipes in there that it talks about in concordance with different diseases. The first section of the work, and the longest one though, actually I included the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum as well, just as a primary source work. But then the longest section is prescriptions. It lists a disease, and then it gives cures for it, essentially. And that comes from a half a dozen different works as well. So it's kind of a complex work. It's a compilation. I think that anyone that's into folk medicine will enjoy it. And I tried to cast the net widely, too, because a lot of times, especially with the herbal side of things, it'll be very regional. Like herbs of the U.S., the British healing people's physic, or something like that. I decided to include material from India, from the indigenous drugs of India, which I edited previously, and that's largely recipes and herbalism, so it fit. The Canadian herbal, which is obvious. There's material from multiple European areas. There's material from the Americas, from India. And then some stuff where you're not exactly sure if it's particularly regional at all, especially in the bric-a-brac works. And some of the cures that you see there aren't even, like, there's one from Holman's Powwows, if I remember correctly, like, if you wanted to cure, I believe it was headache, trim your toenails and then smell the nails or something along those lines. This is sort of where you get the Hollywood trope. These bric-a-brac works from the early 19th and also late 18th centuries. This is where you get sort of like the blood of a bat, skin of a cat style of recipes. And there is, no joke, like in the Petit Albert and elsewhere, there are prescriptions for like drinking animal blood, burning herbs in the skulls of wolves to keep away rabid dogs, and stuff like that. And some of it's very superstitious. Other material is much more mundane, and especially the later material, once you get into roughly the 1860s and 70s, you have a much more standardized approach. And typically what would happen is these little remedies, local apothecaries would mix them with fortune telling, or with life advice, or with anything domestic. Cooking, animal husbandry, stuff that the lower and middle classes would be more interested in because they'd sell more copies. So they'd have various like tonics and ointments, Foot's powder and Dover's powder and stuff like that they'd be selling in their apothecary, but they'd also have like a laundry list of other material because printing became more cheap. It became a lot cheaper around that area, and industry takes over, things become more automated, paper's more available, ink is cheaper, and so you have these little pamphlets and they paid for themselves. And there are so many of these available. I haven't even begun to edit them all. I've got, I think, 20 or 30 different variants of these particular works on file already. And that's without even fully searching for more. And I intend to edit every single one of them. That being said, in the future, I intend to make an herbal compilation. That will just be herbal and recipe lore, no astrology, none of the prescription stuff. It'll be basically encyclopedic. But again, 320 pages of folk medicine, containing basically everything but the kitchen sink over the course of several centuries. If you include the regimen, that's a medieval text. I used the Harrington translation from the 17th century as opposed to one of the newer ones due to copyright, but it's an interesting work. It's essentially the first comprehensive dietary and life guide ever written, as far as we know, in Europe. It's possible. I believe there were some more ancient texts out of parts of Rome and some Middle Eastern texts that kind of do the same thing, but it's the first one that would be, it would have been in Latin, that would have been sort of comprehensive. Some of the advice is great, healthily getting exercise, eating certain foods, avoiding others, temperance, and other things less so, like again, using lead or mercury as medicine is generally these days frowned upon. So link in the description to my edition of this work on Amazon. Highly recommended if you're into anything related to medical history, homeopathy, herbalism. It covers them all fully reformatted and re-edited to take care of any remaining grammatical errors, of which there weren't that many because most of those works were more recent. I implemented a second spelling check in all of my works fairly quickly. And second and third links to my books, blogs. If you're interested in that, there is an herbal category there. There are a great many other works available. That's about all. Peace out.